Hey, everybody, we're back with more Life and Times of George Washington. And I want to talk about, well, some of the things, the challenges that Washington faced here in the early stages of the war. And like I said in the previous episode, Washington, he commanded the army, but he didn't control the war. And that power, at least on paper, belonged to the Continental Congress and also to the individual 13 states. Now, this division's pretty important because it matters, right? Congress could do things like appoint the generals and authorize the spending and issue directives. But one of the weaknesses of the Continental Congress, and it'll grow into the Articles of Confederation later, is the fact that it didn't have the power to levy taxes. It couldn't force the states to comply with the needs of Congress and the Continental Army. Everything depended upon cooperation, and cooperation was inconsistent at best. States began to prioritize local defense. They put more of their efforts into their militias rather than the Continental Army. So, any type of supplies that were promised by the Congress or even the states often arrived late, or more often than not at all. Men were raised up from the states for the Continental Army rather unevenly. It's not like all 13 states were meeting their obligations, right? It wasn't like everybody's paying their share. Pay for the soldiers varied by the region. Enlistments depended upon individual state calendars, not military need. And so Washington wrote constantly. He had letters asking for food, for clothing, for reinforcements. And sometimes those letters were answered. Oftentimes, they were just delayed. Now, this wasn't some type of active sabotage against the Continental Army. It was just, I guess the best way to describe it is just a structural weakness. The revolution was being fought by a national army without a national government. Washington had authority over the soldiers in his command, the soldiers in the field, but almost none, no command whatsoever over the systems that sustained that army. He couldn't compel Congress. He could not command the governors. He could not solve shortages by some type of just autocratic decree. And this type of tension that exists really shaped the war. The military plans that Washington wanted to put in place, in addition to other commanders too, but we're focusing on Washington here, the plans were often constrained by politics. And victories, potential victories, could have been stalled because the lack of supplies, the supply line had failed. Losses could be deepened because coordination broke down between Congress and the Army and the states and the Army. And as the war dragged on, the greatest limit on Washington's power was not British strength, but instead it was a political system that was still trying to figure out how to govern itself.